Welcome to meeting 44 of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 81.5 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, 21st of November 2022, the committee is meeting to study Supplementary Estimates B 2022-2023. Today's meeting will take place in a hybrid format pursuant to the Order of the House adopted on Thursday, 23rd of June 2022.
Before us today, we have the Honorable Omar Alghabra, Minister of Transport, as well as from the Department of Transport, Michael Keenan, Deputy Minister, Ryan Pilgrim, Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister, Corporate Services, Stephanie Hébert, Assistant Deputy Minister, Programs, and Nicholas Robinson, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for Safety and Security, who will be appearing before us between 3:30 and 5:30, and that's referring to the Department of Transport officials. And then from 4:30 to 5:30, we have the addition of Serge Bigimin, Assistant Deputy Minister, Policy, and Vincent Robitaille, Assistant Deputy Minister, High Frequency Rail. Minister, on behalf of all members of this committee, I would like to welcome you to our committee and turn it over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Great to be back with you. Bonjour à tous. Thank you for inviting me here to speak about the Supplementary Estimates B for Transport Canada and other agencies and Crown corporations within the federal transport portfolio. I'm also pleased to introduce officials who are here with me from Transport Canada: Michael Keenan, Deputy Minister of Transport; Ryan Pilgrim, Assistant Deputy Minister, Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer; Nicholas Robinson, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Safety, Security; and Stephanie Hébert, Assistant Deputy Minister, Programs. Mr. Chair, in my past appearance before this committee, I've talked about how the COVID-19 pandemic, extreme weather events, and Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine have caused global supply chain disruptions that affect our supply chain here at home. Our government understands the impact these challenges can have on Canadians, including the rising cost of living. I've also stressed that the safety and security of the transportation system is my highest priority. That's why I was pleased to recently introduce Bill C-33, the Strengthening of the Port System and Railway Safety in Canada Act, which addresses both of these priorities. C'est pourquoi j'ai présenté le projet.
Bill C. That is why I was pleased to introduce Bill C-33.
Make Canada's transportation system more competitive and ensure its operations are safe, secure, efficient, and reliable. I look forward to seeing the legislation progress, as it would keep essential goods flowing and make life more affordable for all Canadians. I also recognize the need to keep people moving. You will notice the high-frequency rail project mentioned a number of times in the supplementary estimates for both Transport Canada and Via Rail. As outlined in Budget 2022, after years of important work, the time has come for some big steps forward for this major project. The high-frequency rail project would see a new dedicated intercity passenger rail network connecting Toronto, Peterborough, Ottawa, Montreal, Trois-Rivières, and Quebec City. It would allow for faster, more frequent, and more reliable trains with better service to major hubs and new links to new communities. There are funds in the supplementary estimate to support the procurement process and to select a private developer partner to co-develop the project with the Government of Canada. A collaborative public-private partnership will help to maximize the project's benefit for all Canadians. A new Via Rail subsidiary will serve as the project delivery office and will serve as the strong public sector counterpart to a private development partner. The funding would also support important activities like work on the impact assessment process, Indigenous consultations, development of socio-economic benefits, municipal and public engagement, access to railway infrastructure, and rail safety updates. Funding in the supplementary estimates would also help with work to assess opportunities for improving passenger rail service in southwestern Ontario. The HFR is the biggest investment in passenger rail in Canada in a generation. Le train à grande fréquence.
The HFR is the biggest investment in passenger rail in Canada in a generation.
Employees will continue to be a key partner in this project and are essential to its success and advancement. We're also seeking funds in this year's supplementary estimate to improve rail transportation for remote Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba. The objective is to maintain safe, reliable, viable, and sustainable transportation that meets the specific needs of communities between the Pugatawagan, supporting social and economic development. Many of these communities are only accessible by rail. They need this service to access economic opportunities and essential goods and services, including healthcare. There's also a request in the Supplementary Estimates B to support the extension of the Oceans Protection Plan as outlined in Budget 2022. The Ocean Protection Plan is the largest investment Canada has ever made to protect our oceans and coast. Le Plan de Protection des
The Oceans Protection Plan is the largest investment Canada has ever made to protect our oceans and coasts.
The new funding requested would further protect our coastlines and waterways in 4 critical areas, continuing efforts to deliver a world-leading marine safety system, including improving how Canada responds to marine emergencies, increasing protection for marine species and ecosystems, creating stronger partnership with Indigenous and coastal communities, and strengthening marine research and science. This work would continue to help safeguard our oceans and coastlines while enabling supply chain resilience and supporting economic growth. By renewing and expanding the plan, we are committing to build on the progress we have made since its launch in 2016. Finally, I also want to mention our plan to accelerate the development of light, medium, and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicles as detailed in Budget 2022. This will be implemented through existing grant programming. Canadians have made it clear they want clear air, good job, and lower costs. By making zero-emission vehicles more affordable, we are helping reduce pollution, create more well-paying jobs, and build a cleaner world for generations to come. Cela contribue à réduire.
This will help to reduce pollution and create jobs.
Happy to answer any questions my colleagues may have. Je suis heureux de répondre.
I'd be pleased to respond to your questions.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you.
Opening remarks. We will begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. You spoke in your opening remarks about the need to keep people moving, and obviously we saw this summer chaos at our airports, which was, I would say, made worse by our COVID-19, as has been described to us here at the committee. We were the first to impose COVID-19 restrictions and the last to relieve them, and the airlines certainly saw that with their employees. That uncertainty caused a lot of folks to seek other lines of work. We saw $54 million spent on the ArriveCan app, which just caused more delays in our customs halls. $411 million was spent on COVID-19 airport testing in the last year, while other countries had removed that requirement. So not only was it inefficient, it was expensive, layering on costs to Canadian taxpayers to create airport chaos. We've seen Pearson, for instance, Toronto Pearson Airport ranked as the 5th worst airport in the world in terms of customer experience. I note that you have brought together industries and the airports and the airlines, etc., to talk about it. But at those meetings, did you talk about how you are going to improve the things that are under the control of the federal government, things like security lineups, things like customs hall lineups, things that are completely inside of the Government of Canada's control? How are you going to ensure, without blaming it on the airlines or on global factors, because every airport that was evaluated under this review dealt with those same things? So why did our airports fare so poorly, and what are you doing to ensure that the things that are under the Government of Canada's control, I want to hear about CATSA, CBSA, are not a fiasco again this winter as they were in the summer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are so many questions in that question, but I do appreciate the overall theme of your question. The fact of the matter is COVID-19 has been an extraordinary period where governments around the world, provincial governments, municipal government, including our federal government, did whatever we can to protect the health and safety of Canadians, and that included some extraordinary measures that had to be put in place to protect the health and safety of Canadians. And indeed, the air sector has suffered significantly because of the pandemic. The good news is that we're seeing the air sector recover and recover faster than any of us expected, which is great news. But of course, that brought some challenges and optimism. As you mentioned last week, I hosted a summit that included 50 industry leaders, including CEO of airports and airlines, and CEOs or heads of CATSA, NAV Canada, CBSA, provincial governments, and other governmental agencies, including the Canadian Transportation Agencies. And we all agreed that there are some lessons learned from that period, that we need to focus on areas of collaboration, including how we can modernize security screening, how we can support the air sector. But let me just close, Mr. Speaker, by saying, Mr. Chair, during that period of COVID, we provided a total package of $11 billion to the sector to help them recover. Now, there are some lessons learned. We are committed together to collaborate and work around them, including governmental agencies, so we can make sure that the unfortunate and unacceptable frustrations that took place last summer never happen again.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to go now to, you talked about supply chain reliability and predictability, I think are critical here. We'll have time to discuss whether Bill C-33 actually addresses those things. We'll save that for your next meeting here. But I do want to talk about the global context, and any time, and the supply chain, National Supply Chain Task Force addressed this. Any time that the reliability and predictability of our supply chain is threatened, it impacts the Canadian economy. It impacts for months the reliability and efficiency of our system. By my count, you have 18 collective agreements expiring December 31st that are in the transport federal sphere. Many of them relate to the rail sector. I haven't seen anything that indicates that the government is taking this seriously. Certainly in the U.S., we've seen very aggressive actions taken by President Biden and the Congress. What are we doing to ensure that our system is reliable as we see all of these labor agreements coming to an end in just a few weeks' time?
30-second response, please, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to my colleague for that question. Look, supply chain is extremely important. That's why we established a task force. That's why my colleagues and I are working on a comprehensive strategy to build on all the work that has been done so far. Addressing exactly your question, we believe strongly the best way to maintain resilience of supply chain is to let the collective bargaining agreement take its course. That is the best way to ensure that both union workers and employers are on the same page, that there's contentment with the outcome. So far, we've had success. CP found a way to resolve their issues. UPS found a way to resolve their issues. Via Rail found a way to resolve these issues. We believe that the best way to maintain a reliable supply chain is to enable and support the collective bargaining agreement. We keep monitoring the situation. We support both sides as they are at the negotiating table by offering mediators, by offering encouragement. But again, ultimately, collective bargaining agreement is the best way to preserve the resilience of our supply chains.
Thank you very much, Minister. Next, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. Welcome to the officials here with you today. When I reviewed your supplementary estimates, of course, the first thing I saw was about Marine Atlantic. And, of course, being from Newfoundland and Labrador, I have no choice but to start with that question. I know some good things are happening with the Marine Atlantic ferry service. For example, 2024, we have a new ferry that's supposed to arrive, and we have a new administration building planned for Port of Mass, so some good things are happening. So I just want you to comment on the proposed new funding for Marine Atlantic, and how many capital projects will this support, and how will they help Marine Atlantic, I guess, deliver on its mandate? Maybe you can give me some examples of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Mr. Rogers, for his question and his advocacy. He and many of his Newfoundland colleagues keep reminding me, and not that I need to be reminded, but they keep reminding me of the importance of Marine Atlantic, and our government is committed to continuing to work with Marine Atlantic on delivering the service that Canadians and Newfoundlanders expect of it. Through the supplementary estimate, Marine Atlantic, Inc. is seeking access to $4.7 million sourced from funding that lapsed last year and brought forward to this coming to 2022-23 through a reprofile request. This funding could not be spent last year due to a variety of projects being delayed by supply chain and scheduling issue. So, but you asked me about the specific example of what these projects include. They are the following. $1.9 million is allocated to shore-based projects such as the replacement of the Port aux Basques terminal roof, the recladding of one of the port fuel tanks, repairs to the loading ramp, and some security enhancement. $1.7 million is associated with the required vessel maintenance. $1.1 million is allocated to the purchase of electric vehicles that were ordered in 21-22 but will not be delivered until the end of 22-23. The funding are required to meet legal obligations of signed contracts and maintenance required to keep Marine Atlantic's physical infrastructure in working condition. This funding will allow Marine Atlantic to continue to meet its mandate of providing Canadians with essential service they deserve.
Thank you, Minister. It's great to see you paying so much attention to that service, vitally important for our province, and for the province of Nova Scotia, of course, as the connections there. Minister, can you elaborate on how the new funding for the Oceans Protection Plan will help create partnerships with Indigenous groups and coastal communities?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to my colleague. The Ocean Protection Plan has been a huge success since its creation or introduction in 2016. The Government of Canada is committed to continuing to work meaningfully with First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and coastal communities in delivering the Oceans Protection Plan and respecting the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. The funding will advance this work and offer new opportunities for Indigenous peoples and coastal communities to do the following: have a more meaningful role in emergency response and waterway management, partner in decision-making, train in marine safety, search and rescue missions, environmental monitoring, and emergency spill response. And recently, I announced an investment of $50 million to directly support Indigenous partnership in the OPP. This will provide much-needed capacity funding to support meaningful participation of Indigenous communities and organizations in Oceans Protection Plan initiatives.
All right. Thank you, Minister. I remember being in BC about 3 years ago, and we were talking to some of the groups there, and they were talking about the importance of that funding for the training program. It's great to see it happening. Minister, can you provide more details on how the funding in the supplementary estimates will improve how Canada responds to marine emergencies, like you just referenced? And will this be targeted for the West Coast specifically, or will it help other coastlines and waterways as well?
Mr. Chair, the Ocean Protection Plan funding will improve how Canada responds to marine emergencies by first amending the Canada Shipping Act to enable the proactive management of marine emergencies and to cover more types of pollution as committed in budget of 2022, developing a coordinated national pollution response system regardless of location or type of good spilled, moving forward with a sustainable hazardous and noxious substance preparedness and response framework to address marine pollution in Canada while ensuring the health and safety of response personnel and the public, augmenting the National Area Surveillance Program, funding to partners and departments for OPP also supports marine emergencies response through the purchase of new pollution response vessels, communications tools, and equipment, especially for the Arctic, the development of a national network of trained emergency response that include multiple levels of government, Indigenous peoples, and coastal communities, scientific enhancement to protect the environment during the cleanup and recovery of a spill, growth of the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary. And just to assure you, it is for coast to coast to coast.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Rogers. Prochainement, nous avons...
Next up, Mr. Barcelot Duval, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. I think it's highly appreciated that you are taking the time to come before the committee to respond to our questions. Now, first question. You're surely aware of the fact that at this committee we produce reports, and one report focused on rail safety. Among the report's recommendations, there was a recommendation calling on the government to create a fund to look at feasibility of certain urban ferries, and I'm wondering if you continue to implement that, if you intend to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues. Merci pour votre question. I am grateful for the work that the committee has done on rail safety. I received the report with great interest, and I think we even submitted a response to it. There are a lot of good ideas. We agree with the objectives that you set out, and we are looking at how some of those, if not all of those recommendations can be implemented, or how we can partner with other departments and other governments to ensure that we advance the recommendations that committee had come up with.
Well, thank you. But more specifically, in my riding in Boucherville and other towns such as Verchères and Contrecoeur, there is a rail network, and in Boucherville, for example, there's a pre-feasibility study regarding a railway, but there might be a feasibility study on the table. So following up on that recommendation is crucial to that community. They are looking for funding to be able to carry out a complete feasibility study on a railroad in that area. Now, have you heard of that particular project? That's my first question. And secondly, what kind of support could we expect from the federal government to move forward in that area?
Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. Our government has invested a historic amount of dollars in building rail infrastructure around the country, in partnering with provincial governments and municipal governments in building public transit, including rail public transit. We are always interested in partnering with provincial governments. As you may know, that inner city public transit is the jurisdiction of the province. If the province has an interest in partnering with the federal government, we would be more than willing to look at the application and figure out how we can partner together to advance it. But rest assured that we're always looking for projects that will advance public transit, including certainly rail transit.
Thank you. But here it's about relocating railroad that is currently federally regulated. Now, in the same report, it discusses not only funding studies for the relocation of railroad, but in fact financing the actual relocation, for example, in the Megantic Lake project that the government committed to. And in the recommendations, it talks about that possibility of relocating railroads elsewhere in the wake of the Lac Megantic project. What's the appetite of your government in relation to that project?
Mr. Barsalou-Duval, for pointing out examples of how our federal government is working collaboratively with the province of Quebec on building rail infrastructure. You're asking me to preemptively give you an answer about a proposal that I have not been submitted yet. If there is anything I can do to help with where this application should be going, who should be reviewing it, I'd be happy to help. But I'm unable to give you preemptively what the government's decision. But again, we are more than willing to partner with the province of Quebec, as we have illustrated, like with Lac Megantic, with public transit in Montreal, in other regions of Quebec, to do so. So I'd be more than willing to sit down with you and look at the proposal that you're referring to.
Concernant le règlement.
Now, concerning the regulation to protect airline passengers, in this committee, we heard from consumers' advocacy groups that said that the current regime is too complicated and the burden of proof when they have concerns or misgivings or want to flag an injustice, that the onus was entirely on the consumer, that was entirely dependent on the airlines, and that made it tough on consumers. These consumer advocacy groups are calling that this onus of burden of proof should be reversed and that it be up to the airlines to show that they are not responsible or accountable in certain circumstances. Do you think that would be a good approach of overhauling the regulation on airline travel passengers?
We are the first government in Canada's history to put together a set of rules to protect passengers' rights. I would agree that the period of the last 2 years have stressed the system and has caused a lot of disruptions, and there are a lot of lessons learned. I am more than willing to, when we are currently re-examining the regulations, to figure out how we can strengthen them, how we can make them more efficient and more transparent.
Thank you very much, Minister. Merci, Mr. Barsalou-Duval. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and your officials for being with us today. I wanted to start with Bill C-33, and I appreciate that you're grateful for the committee's work. However, our report included 20 recommendations on rail safety. And my read of Bill C-33 is that it doesn't address a single one of those recommendations. Why is that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague for that question. As you can imagine, the committee issued a report just merely a few weeks before the bill was tabled. So we are currently reviewing many of those recommendations, and we are committed to taking action. Many of the recommendations offer a lot of wisdom and ideas that we are, as I have said earlier, we're committed to reviewing them one by one, and we will take action when necessary. But as I said, the bill had been drafted before the recommendation had come out. That doesn't mean that we couldn't do more work. That doesn't mean that the committee, is always able to review the bill and offer recommendations. But I know that the committee had offered many recommendations, including reviewing the rail police. I know Mr. Bachrach, you really have highlighted this on many occasions to me personally and committee, and we are committed to doing the review. And once the review is completed, whatever recommendations or action is necessary will be taken.
So on that issue, the issue of private corporate rail police in Canada, this has been an issue that you've known about for a long time. I think it was an issue that really became evident to a lot of Canadians with the 2019 rail disaster in British Columbia near Field. I'm curious why, given all of the concerns that we've heard over the years, why there is nothing in this legislation to address this egregious conflict of interest that exists in Section 44 and 44.1 of the Rail Safety Act.
Mr. Bachrach, I take rail safety and all modes of transportation safety extremely seriously. And that's precisely why we need to do our review properly. I think rushing into, while let's acknowledge that this issue needs to be reviewed, but in order for us to finalize or come up with a concrete set of action, we need to do a full review that includes rail companies, that includes unions, that includes stakeholders, that includes parliamentarians. So we want to do it right. And as I said, Transport Canada is committed to completing this review properly and fully.
So Pam Fraser, who lost her son in that disaster, recently appeared at a press conference. This is what she said. Their bodies lay frozen, Dylan in the engine, Daniel in the water, and Andrew outside the engine on the ground, freezing all that night. The people who came the next day to gather these bodies were CP Rail personnel. Why in Canada are we allowing multi-billion-dollar rail corporations to police themselves? Like, how is this, how is the government not dealing with this? Like, there's a review, but this has been an issue for 50 years, for 100 years. How is it possible that we accept such an archaic practice in this country?
Mr. Bachrach, my heart goes out to the family and to Pam and all the loved ones of the ones who were lost. And as I said, Transport Canada is committed to fully reviewing this practice. We are currently consulting, we're collecting evidence, we're examining the rules and what can be done to build upon improving rail safety. So you have, and Pam and her family have my personal commitment that this is work that is ongoing, and we want to make sure we do it right, and we want to make sure that it's done in consultation with the sector, but also with parliamentarians.
When will the review be complete, Minister?
It is something that we're taking extremely seriously, and Transport Canada is committed to finalizing the review by next year.
Okay, the UK has a publicly accountable independent rail police that reports to an independent commission. Why can't Canada have a similarly strong system of oversight for our rail sector? Like, why is it that other countries seem to have figured this out and they don't allow their rail companies to police themselves? Why is Canada different?
Mr. Bachrach, Canada has one of the safest rail network in the world. That does not mean that we don't have challenges. And this is an ongoing work that we always need to push ourselves better. One injury, one loss of life is too many. And we are going to continue to look at what we can do to improve safety, and that's precisely what we're doing, including examining other models around the world.
Is there another transportation sector in our country that has its own police force?
I don't want to answer this question without and give you the wrong answer. Mr. Bachrach, we are taking this matter extremely seriously, and I'm grateful to your work, your personal work, and the work of the members of the committee here, and the advocacy of community members and community organizations. This is a matter that we're committed to reviewing fully, and we are acting on it.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here once again to answer questions, and we appreciate that. The last time you were with us at committee here, we were talking about the state of Canada's airports after a spring and summer of turmoil. And I know that my colleague, Mr. Stroll, asked about that and pointed to some statistics in terms of where we stood in the world. And at that time, you were quite emphatic that more needs to be done. You pointed to some improvements, but you were quite emphatic that more needs to be done. So I know when you answered Mr. Stroll's question, you spoke about some generalities, but maybe you can be more specific. What between August 19th and today, 3.5 months later, has been done to improve the state of Canada's airports, the long lines, the baggage mayhem, the delays and cancellations that we've seen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Muse, for that question. There have been short-term measures that have taken place, and there are medium and long-term plans that are ongoing as we speak. The short-term measures was certainly accelerating the hiring of, and again, I'll focus on the government side. CATSA employees, more than 2,100 CATSA employees had been hired in a very short period of time, and ensuring that they are trained and up to speed. There have been standing working group that brings the air sector together, airports, airlines, NAV Canada, CATSA, NCBSA, to address operational issues immediately. We have worked with airports and airlines on expediting the security clearance of new employees and to automatically renew security clearance of existing employees. We've certainly ensured that NAV Canada has a plan to respond to the labour shortage that they dealt with and training of future employees. In the long term, we are currently now working on modernizing the security screening process. We are looking at strengthening the passengers' rights regulations. I know you want, so I'll stop here, but there's more to it.
Sure. So let me ask, that's a number of things. Are you satisfied with the pace of this improvement?
It's an ongoing process, Mr. Muse. I can tell you this. I was not satisfied at what I saw happen last spring and last summer. It was completely unacceptable. I can try to explain or understand what happened, but it was still unacceptable. If you're a passenger who had to wait at an airport for so many hours or had to sleep on the floor or lost your luggage, that was unacceptable.
So specifically in August, you made reference as well to that, Canadians sleeping on the floor in our airports, which is egregious in a G7 country. And you said, as you did today, that was unacceptable. So what can you assure Canadians as we get into the winter and Christmas, peak holiday travel season, that's going to be different? Are we going to be still Canadians sleeping on the floor? Can we assure Canadians that that's not going to happen?
First of all, Mr. Muse, it's really important to point out to Canadians that our sector is quite interlinked and complicated, and the government has direct line of responsibility for CATSA as a Crown corporation. Airports and airlines are independent organizations from government. However, Transport Canada is the regulator, and we do have an ability to influence their operations and how they're conducting themselves. That's why we have first set of rules that protect passengers' rights, that ensures that airlines deliver on the commitment they make to their customers. We have been directly communicating with airports to ensure that what we saw last summer doesn't happen. So we are, and I am personally ensuring that the voice of Canadians is being heard in the sector.
So can I ask, because in May, we were talking about these same issues, in May 30th when you were at committee, and you talked about a working group with the airlines, CATSA, and CBSA, so that's obviously within your bailiwick to deal with these bottlenecks. And I know you referenced earlier in this committee the meeting of a group last week. So what happened in the interim 6 months? Has that working group been operating since the end of May? What were the findings? How have they been implemented to make those improvements?
Sure. I'll repeat what I said earlier. I've actually itemized a few operational changes that took place from hiring of staff to improving operational bottlenecks, including security clearance for employees and new employees, from working with airlines on addressing pilot shortage, from working with airports on ensuring they have the financial support. We've invested in airports alone close to $2 billion between the Airport Critical Infrastructure, Airport Capital Assistance Program, and other and regional airport development. So there's been significant investments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses coming out today. I will be splitting my time with Mr. Chahil, hopefully 2.5 minutes each. So I'll be brief. Mr. Minister, again, welcome. And as you know, Mr. Minister, with respect to Bill C-33, and as you know, indeed, because you were a great help with some of the initiatives that we're beginning to work on in the Niagara region. And with your help, we facilitated a partnership between the cities of Port Colborne, Welland, Thorold, and the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority to establish the Niagara Ports Multimodal Trade Corridor. Minister, this is, as you know again, and with your help, the strategy was created, established, and it strengthens Niagara's overall economy, including our supply chain, and is creating over 10,000 jobs over the next decade. New jobs, over and above what we have right now throughout the region. In our report, this growth has already begun to occur within the jurisdictions of all the partners and across the Niagara region, and quite frankly, predominantly across southwestern Ontario. So, Minister, with Bill C-33, how do you see this legislation strengthening the future of this trade corridor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Badaway, let me first applaud your vision and hard work over the last many years in recognizing the opportunity that is before you and the region to enhance the work of Great Lakes for the region, from an economic development, from job creation, and I'll continue to be delighted to work with you on advancing that vision. Certainly, some of the supply chain challenges have included many port challenges, port congestions, old ways of doing things. And I will point out to one thing that I know will be helpful to the Great Lakes and the Port of Hamilton as well, is the enabling of creating abilities for ports to have inland ports, creating abilities for ports to cooperate and collaborate, and creating a much more stable investment framework for ports to attract investment. I think this will be extremely helpful to the plans that the region has for developing its Great Lake trade corridor, for utilizing the port terminals, and for supporting economic development in the region.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Minister. I'll now pass on the rest of my time to Mr. Chahal.
Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. Minister, I represent a very diverse riding and home of the Calgary International Airport. Minister, you recently announced an expanded air transport agreement between Canada and India. This is great news for Canadians wanting to travel to India. However, some media outlets initially reported this would allow for unlimited flights between the two countries, creating an impression that everything was now permissible, including direct flights between cities like Calgary to New Delhi to Chandigarh or Amritsar. However, that is not the case, correct? And if I could follow up, if you could comment on what the expanded air transport agreement means, and how is it different than the agreement that was reached when the Conservatives were in power in 2011?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Chahal, thank you for that question. I know you and several of our colleagues have been flagging this issue with me for a while. Canadians, those who have a need or desire to travel to India, have been asking for so long to increase travel options, including direct flights to Amritsar. And I certainly supported that objective. Last spring, I met with the Indian Minister of Civil Aviation here in Ottawa, and I directly asked him and expressed our desire to expand the air transport agreement with India to enable flight operators to land anywhere, everywhere, to have an open sky agreement, including direct flights to Amritsar. The Indian government was not ready for that step. So what we agreed on an interim basis is to expand what we have and lift the cap of number of flights from 35 flights a week to unlimited flights to number of week, however, to the same airports that have already been agreed upon. I will still do whatever I can to advance that objective. I'd like to see direct flights to Amritsar. We need the Indian government's approval to get that, and we will continue to work with them on seeing that dream realized.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Chahal. Prochainement, nous avons...
Mr. Barcelo-Duval, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to come back to the issue of the regulation protecting airline passengers. Witnesses appeared before the committee. The Canada Transport Board has had backlogs of unprocessed complaints. There are thousands and thousands of them, and this has been dragging on for years. We know that the Transportation Board can't cope. It seems like it takes them years before they process complaints. And the standard waiting time is 1.5 to 2 years currently, which is completely unacceptable. We get the sense that they're never going to get on top of this. And we also have an airline passenger protection system which puts the onus of proof on consumers that don't have all the information at their disposal, that can't engage in an investigation and don't have the skills and aren't aware of what the technicalities of airports and aircraft are, and they can't stand up for their rights because they don't have the ability to do so. Now, when a flight is cancelled, passengers should always be able to get refunded. It's not necessarily their first favoured option, but, there are a lot of people who, if they have to wait for 48 hours, the wedding's over, the convention's over, the business meeting is over. It's just not viable to be rebooked on another flight within 48 hours without knowing the individual circumstances of particular people. It has to suit the consumer. Do you agree with me?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Barcelo-Duval. The last couple of years have been extraordinary, and we saw an extraordinary number of disruption that certainly caused an unpredictable or unforecasted number of complaints. I know the Canadian Transportation Agency is doing their best to deal with this unprecedented volume. We are committed to working with them, and when I say we, I mean the Government of Canada and Transport Canada and me personally, to provide them the resources they need, but also to work with them on figuring out how we can improve the efficiency of the system. This period has stress-tested the system, has exposed some areas of vulnerabilities. And as I said to you and to the committee just now, I am committed to currently reviewing what lessons learned from this period, and and whatever recommendations is found to improve and strengthen the Passenger Bill of Rights, we will take action.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, it's been 1.5 years since Greyhound pulled out of Canada. It's been over 4 years since they pulled out of Western Canada. And right now, Canadians, especially low-income Canadians, have fewer passenger transportation options than they have in decades and decades. Now, you've said in the past that if the provinces step up with proposals, the federal government is willing to provide resources. But what we've heard at the Transport Committee from witnesses in our current study on bus transport is that what's lacking is federal leadership. So my question is, what happens when the provinces don't step up, when they don't come forward with proposals to fill the holes left by Greyhound? At one point, Greyhound provided an interconnected, interprovincial system of bus transport all across the country. Now we have a fragment of that, a shadow of that former network. So what happens when the provinces don't come forward? Because frankly, they're not interested in building a national passenger bus network. What leadership are you willing to show as our transport minister to ensure that Canadians have access to the kinds of bus transportation that a lot of other countries take for granted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Bachrach. I know this is yet another issue as well you've demonstrated leadership on for a while, and you and I have spoken about this, and you've raised this question, understandably so, because I agree with you on the principle that there are communities that are underserved today. There are many Canadians who depend on inner city bus service that unfortunately is not as available as it used to be before. And that concerns me. And to answer your question, what leadership has the federal government done in this? I have personally written to all of my provincial, and let me step back, and I know it's not always great to hear this, but as you know, inner city bus transportation is a provincial matter. However, I've written to all provincial ministers, and I've asked them, and have expressed willingness on behalf of the federal government to work collaboratively with provinces on any initiative or projects that they may have to address this gap. The province of British Columbia had a project, we partnered with them, and we provided support to address this gap. So I will repeat, while it is constitutionally the responsibility of the province, we are more than willing to partner and collaborate with provinces on addressing this gap. I've not heard back from any provincial minister about any ideas that they may have. So if, I'll continue to work with you. I know you're reaching out to your provincial counterparts and across the country. I think Canadians should write to their MPP or MLA or MNA to express their desire about the need that they have. And I'll repeat, the federal government is willing to collaborate and partner with provinces in addressing this gap.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, in the final report of the National Supply Chain Task Force, it was recommended that the government's work to reopen fast free and secure trade program offices here in Canada. There's an 11,000 application backlog. This is a program that allows low-risk shipments and drivers traveling between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico expedited travel across the border. I note that Nexus is also affected. There's hundreds of thousands of applications waiting there. Many Canadians who do travel frequently to do business in the United States rely on this. We heard about the need to reopen these enrollment centres in Canada. Can you give this committee an update on when that will happen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Strahl. I share your concern about the disruptions that we've seen to either FAST or Nexus. I know many Canadians, including many truck drivers, rely on that service so they are able to cross the border efficiently. We have been in active discussions with our friends in the U.S. on opening these offices. My understanding is that we've made progress on FAST, Nexus. We made some progress to automatically renew some of the expired applications, but there's still work being done. We need the U.S. To advance this objective, and I know we are in active discussions. I'm looking forward to doing it or seeing results as quickly as possible.
Going back to the airline passenger protection regulations, I noted in the, don't imagine it was your mandate letter, but your predecessors, that there was a desire to see service standards for federally regulated organizations like CATSA, CBSA, et cetera, to have the service standards implemented. How are we doing on that? And do you agree with the airlines who presented here on APPR, believing that organizations like NAV Canada, CATSA, CBSA, the airports themselves, if they fail to meet that standard and it affects passengers on their journeys, that they should be part of the, the compensation package for affected passengers? Or do you think it should still fall entirely on the airlines to manage the compensation for affected passengers?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Strahl, let me just say that organizations like CATSA already have a service standard. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be improved or reviewed. And that's what we're doing right now. As I stated earlier, we are currently reviewing, and this was part of the discussion that we had at the summit last week, is we are reviewing operating standards and quality service quality standard for all agencies, including government agencies. I just want to point out, though, it is the airline that has the purchase agreement with the customer. So they are the ones who were paid by the customer. Having said that, I will acknowledge that other agencies have an impact because the sector is so interlinked and interdependent that they would or could have an impact on the airline's ability to deliver their service.
I'm trying to get one more question in. You spoke about electric vehicles. We've heard about mandates for that. I was interested to note that there's some reporting that to replace an en route gas station would require the amount of electricity that's currently required to power the city of Belleville, for instance. And we've seen in California and now Switzerland where there has been, where the power grid has not been able to handle. They've been telling people, please don't charge your electric vehicles. What has the government done to ensure that they're not just announcing at the consumer end or the where you plug in your electric vehicle? What have they done to look at the baseload power that's required as we transfer to electric vehicles going forward? Or are we going to see, like California, like Switzerland, telling people just not to plug in their cars so that we can keep powering our homes?
20-second response, please, Minister.
Look, first of all, this is an exciting period for the auto sector as we are moving into a transformational period to reduce emissions. The government, in addition to providing incentive for consumers, we are investing $500 million to build recharging stations in partnership with communities, but also the budget contained $250 million to work with provinces on modernize and improve their grid. So I know there are a lot of smart people in local utilities and provincial operating systems who are working on this, and the federal government has set aside $250 million to provide support of any initiative that may advance that goal.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Strahl. Prochainement et finalement.
Next, Mr. Iachonneau. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank the Minister for his visit as well as his officials. Minister, could you please elaborate on the way the new subsidiary of Via Rail will help to advance the high-frequency rail project, and why is a new subsidiary necessary, and what would the specific duties and responsibilities of the new subsidiary be under this funding model?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Iachonneau, for that question. The high-frequency rail, and I referred to it in my opening remarks, is a transformational project. It's not only going to be the largest infrastructure project in Canada's history, but it's also going to transform that corridor by creating safe, reliable, fast, and frequent service to Canadians who live along the busiest rail corridor in Canada. This project, as I said, it's large, it's complicated, so we wanted to make sure that we have a rigorous oversight process to ensure that the execution of the project happens on time, on budget, according to high standards of accountability and transparency. And the model that we've landed on is the creation of subsidiary of Via Rail called Via HFR that will report directly to Parliament through the Minister of Transport, with a board of directors that ensure that the project is administered and implemented, as I said, responsibly and prudently.
Merci, Minister.
Thank you, Minister. What are the next major milestones to be monitoring in the development of the high-frequency rail project?
Mr. Chair, we've taken significant steps to date, and we are now also at a historic moment of this project. Earlier this year, we issued expression of interest to partners in the private sector. More than 50 organizations participated by offering questions and expressing interest. Just last month, or maybe more, it's just 6 weeks ago, we released the summary of what we heard from potential partners in the private sector. The next step would be to issue a request for qualification to seek expressed interest by companies or consortia of companies who are interested in partnering with us. Transport Canada, with the help of VIA HFR and experts, will assess those proposals, and based on the request for qualification, then we would enter into request for proposal.
Merci.
Could you remind us how the high-frequency rail project will improve connectivity in Canada along the mail rail passenger rail corridor?
Mr. Chair, I know Canadians have been talking about this service for decades. Particularly those who live in this corridor that connects Quebec City all the way to Toronto and Windsor and the communities in between, have been aspiring to see fast, efficient, reliable rail service that they can rely on. And for as long as VIA has been around, there's not been a dedicated track for VIA that enables it to provide dedicated service. This project will create dedicated track that will be green, will be electric, will be fast, it'll connect communities, and it will open up not only convenience for passengers, but also economic development. And I would emphasize it's a great nation-building exercise that will bring our communities closer together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iacono. Thank you, Minister.
Pleasure welcoming you here to committee. On behalf of all members, I want to thank you for giving us your time and responding to all of our questions and concerns. With that, I will suspend the meeting for 2 minutes as we allow the Minister to leave, and we welcome 2 additional witnesses from Transport. This meeting is suspended. Sure. We'll be beginning our round of questioning for the second panel with Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you to all the department officials for being here today again. Some of you are returning, I know. And I'm not sure who to direct this question to. Maybe we'll start with the Deputy Minister, or you can deflect to someone else if that's the subject matter expert. So I know in August when we had the meeting on the chaos at airports, the minister in that meeting cited the figures of flight delays and cancellations from that particular week and the week previous, and that there had been incremental improvement week over week. Do we know where we sit today in Canada's airports in terms of flight delays and cancellations, and how that compares with other jurisdictions?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. I will, and I appreciate the invitation to refer to colleagues when necessary. There has been, Mr. Chair, the member is exactly right. There has been some significant progress starting around the third week of July, where the numbers began to turn. There was a very high rates of cancellations and delays at that time, and then so we've seen some significant improvements. And I'll give you an example. Toronto Pearson is down to 2% cancellations in the last week. Vancouver's down to 1.5%. Montreal Trudeau's 2.7%. Calgary's 0.6%. And that's running sort of in the neighborhood. It's slightly higher, but in the neighborhood of the rate of cancellations that we've seen before COVID. So the canceled flight rates, which were at one point well over 10%, have come way down to in about normal rates, slightly above. In terms of on-time performance, there's been significant improvements in on-time performance sort of across the system from the summer. The rate of delays has come down significantly. It is still staying a little bit higher than before 2019, and so it's part of the system continuing to come into balance. Depending on the day you look, there is the Canadian airports are usually they're not. There was a point where some of in the summer, the Canadian airports were in a tough position relative to other airports. They've seen their relative performance improve as we've come into the fall. So you see the system generally getting to a better passenger experience, where you're much more likely to get to the destination and much less likely to be delayed in the process therein.
How does that compare with other jurisdictions, the United States, for example, or Europe?
I think you can see, you'll see, for example, in I don't know if you take cancellations. The New York is at 0.5%. So Newark's at 0.5%. Chicago's at 0.5%. So those American airlines are still slightly ahead of airports are still slightly ahead of the Canadian airports. But you'll see Frankfurt, Beijing, places like that will typically be a little bit higher.
So you're citing some figures from 2019 and this past summer and maybe the past week or month, and in comparison to other jurisdictions. I wonder if you'd be willing to just table those with the committee as well, just so we have those in front of us as a reference for the future.
We'd be happy to send them along.
So one of the other things that we've studied as a committee, and I know that all federal departments are seized with this, is the labor shortages which are impacting the sector. We've heard at a committee here about 30,000 truckers short in the trucking industry, 50,000 short in the marine industry, another 50,000 short in the air sector going forward, or forecasting. So these are large numbers. So what are you concerned about that, and what are we doing to accelerate the pace of filling those gaps?
A very quick response, please.
I would say very quickly, this is an area of key concern for the Minister for Transport Canada and for all of our provincial colleagues in the transportation sector. There is a work between transportation sector officials and counterparts in immigration, employment, training and skills to get more people into the training programs to have those qualifications needed for the future growth of the industry in all of the sectors mentioned by the member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keenan, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll also be sharing my time with Mr. Badaway. Thank you for joining us today. Following up on my questions to the Minister, can transport officials clarify what needs to happen before direct flights can be offered between Calgary to New Delhi or Amritsar? Is Canada prepared to agree to this? And if the holdup is on the Indian side, in your view, what are the reasons for their reluctance?
Thank you for the question. With respect to, this is all with respect to the air transport agreement between Canada and India, and that it has been the shared interest of both Canada and India to increase direct flight connections, which both countries have been pleased to see an increase in direct flight connections between our two countries, so that people with connections can get back and forth much easier. So that's very positive. Very significant step was taken recently when Minister Alghabra signed the new air transport agreement with his Indian counterpart that took off the quantitative limit on the number of flights. And that allows Air India, Air Canada, WestJet, whoever is flying, to plan to increase frequencies as much as they see fit in the market. Despite that significant advance, there are restrictions in the air transport agreement about what airports they can fly out of, and that Canada is prepared and has made this clear to our Indian colleagues and partners that we would be pleased to further amend the air transport agreement to remove or to lessen those restrictions. And so we will continue to engage our good partners, and we're optimistic at some point we'll reach an agreement. The Indians will be prepared to work with us on a further amendment of the ATA to strengthen our air transport relationship to allow more city pairs, including the ones you mentioned.
Thank you for that answer. I'll turn it over to Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chahal, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Earlier, the Minister mentioned the investments that are being made within Indigenous communities that I only assume would be transportation related. With that said, one of the things that we're trying to work on right now is that, in fact, a lot of the capital investments that are needed within many of these communities are brought more toward a whole of government approach. It's not just one department over another department. It's actually all departments that would be relevant and therefore a whole of government approach. So, Mr. Keenan, I would ask that you speak on that, on moving forward more progressively with a whole of government approach for all capital investments, regardless of what jurisdiction they may enter into throughout this country. And secondly, if we can be, or you can be more specific on some of those Indigenous communities in the capital transportation investments that in fact may be planned for those communities.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Mr. Chair, the member raises a very important question. It has been a top priority of the Minister and Transport Canada to strengthen partnerships with Indigenous peoples who there are many nations that are in a place where they are really important partners in the transportation system, and that we have been working to find solutions to include them as partners in the management of the system. For example, bringing Indigenous partners into the emergency spill response system in the marine response, and building out the transportation system. We've seen that with the FNTI, the First Nation Technical Institute, the flight training school in around Belleville, I think. And we've seen that with the partnerships with the Arctic Gateway Group an Indigenous-led partnership running the railway in northern Manitoba. We do run into the exact problem you've identified, so we've been trying to work it through on a little, I wouldn't say a case-by-case basis, but a project-by-project, and bringing together the federal partners, because we can be a little complicated for counterparties. I think we've done that with the Prairies Can, and the Indigenous Services Canada and Transport have come together in northern Manitoba. And we do need to find a better way. And I think the member's right, and we'll keep searching for that to create that single window where we can, an Indigenous partner can come to us and we can find the right terms to build the transportation system together.
And with that said, and I think equally as important, with the alignment of the initial capital investment, how important does the department also feel, again, with a whole of government approach, to as well then follow that up with a proper asset management plan, so that therefore the life cycle of those assets, repair and maintenance over its time, are being looked after sustainably, and then finally when that asset has to be replaced 10, 20, 30 years down the road, depending on the asset, that the funding will actually be in place to actually replace the asset.
Again, I think you raise a very good point, and it's one where in our funding programs and in our partnership programs, we don't always allow for or fully consider those life cycle dynamics, and we're certainly trying to push more towards being partners with Indigenous groups on sustainable business plans. And because often we're there for the expansion of the capital, but not the operating or not the maintenance of the capital or the operating, and we're trying to find a better balance, and there's more work to do in that respect.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan, and thank you, Mr. Badaway. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Bassel.
Mr. Bassel-Duval, the floor is yours, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Earlier in his opening remarks, Minister Alghabra spoke about how important it was for him to move forward with the high-frequency rail. He seems to have made an undertaking in that direction, of course, so we are in support of that at the Bloc Québécois. Now, I did meet with a number of people who had misgivings with the fact that to date there's been no demonstration of willingness on the part of the government or no indication that a portion of the HRFR would be manufactured out of the country. Some companies are afraid that a big Chinese giant mega company might take control of the HFR because there are huge train manufacturing corporations in China, and yet this is critical infrastructure. So we have, of course, a lot of manufacturing jobs that rely on this and companies that could do this job. What is the government's sense of all of this and foreign ownership? Well, are you referring to the high-frequency train or just any old train project? Yes, the HFR project. Well, we are moving forward with the project stage by stage, and we're starting with a consultative process with community stakeholders. As the Minister indicated, we've had a good response rate. Over 50 companies that have expressed their interest in the project. Now, we do need global experience to ensure the success of the project. We also need the right skill sets back home, domestically, and we are confident in the procurement process when it comes to getting that know-how. Vincent, would you like to elaborate? Yes, thank you very much. There would be a partnership bringing together foreign and domestic expertise. That said, I'd like to reassure you that there will be safety and security standards as well as review processes imposed for foreign investors. They'd need the proper security clearances, and there'd be bilateral security deals and agreements put in place. So evidently, not every stakeholder would be eligible when it comes to foreign investors. Now, we're talking about infrastructure over thousands of kilometres that will be built by Canadians and operated by Canadians, so there'll be major economic spin-offs at all levels, both in terms of the construction of the project and its operation, and also the use of services by Canadian rail passengers in upcoming years. Thank you very much. Well, it's important because we're investing billions and billions of dollars in this project, and we want there to be financial spin-offs back home and jobs too, especially since we have a wealth of expertise here, and we should consolidate that expertise and not contract out unduly, especially given that other countries have highly aggressive commercial practices in some cases and may impinge on our ability to carry out future projects of this kind. Now, on a similar note, I don't know, what about the Gatineau Tramway? We've had meetings, including the Gatineau Tramway Coalition, that would like to see a tramway from Gatineau to the downtown core in Ottawa. There seems to be a problem with the current federal programs, and the witnesses told us that there didn't seem to be any flexibility or willingness to find solutions. Would you like to see this move forward? Because we're talking about Ottawa, Parliament, the capital of Canada, which would benefit greatly from this kind of capital investment project that would go from Gatineau to the downtown core and encourage public servants to use public transit rather than relying on their cars. Now, this is an inter-provincial project, so it requires participation on both sides of the river. Now, on your end, are there folks looking at this, or are you stubbornly saying, well, this is a Quebec-driven project and it's up to them to fund it in its entirety, whereas in fact part of this project is in your hands, and shouldn't there be joint contributions and expectations in terms of the work done? Yes, I am aware of that project, and the Minister of Transport, generally speaking, supports any and all public transit programs. But it falls under the bailiwick of our colleagues at Infrastructure Canada, so I'm afraid I'm not fully aware of all the details entailed in this project, but I'd be pleased to discuss this at length with my colleague and get back to you with a written response. Thank you. That would be appreciated. Now, another issue I'd like to raise, airports. I'm getting calls in my riding office and in my colleagues' riding offices. Apparently, there are aircraft that are flying too low over people's homes, that are landing too close to... And when this happens too often, when people get woken up in the middle of the night, it becomes particularly frustrating, and people think that there's no solution to the problem. They call the airport, they end up getting answering machines, and they contact us in our riding offices, but it's not easy to get our hands on answers. Can we get solutions to these issues? And at the very least, can we keep communication channels open and have a complaints registry? Because, well, the regulation for helicopters is 1,000 feet, and yet 1,000 feet isn't very much. Well, I'm sorry, you have to wait till the next round for your answer to your question, Mr. Barceló-Duval.
Correct. Floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for being here. I'd like to pick up on an issue that I raised several months ago when you were last here, Mr. Keenan. And this relates to the use of tugboats under 15 tons on the BC coast. Obviously, following the 2021 sinking of the Ingenika near Kitimat that took the lives of 2 men, a lot of attention has turned to the lack of regulations in this industry, particularly for these smaller vessels. And I do know that there's a regulatory review process underway. However, I'm still unclear on why certain rules haven't been put in place. So starting with the issue of commercial vessel certification, I just read on Transport Canada's website that all small marine commercial vessels between 15 and 150 gross tonnage must be certified by Transport Canada. Any smaller vessel that carries more than 12 passengers must also be inspected and certified. And yet we have these commercial vessels under 15 tons that are operating in all kinds of weather, towing giant loads, and they don't have to be certified as commercial vessels. Isn't this a simple change that Transport Canada could require companies who operate these small tugboats to have them inspected and certified?
Mr. Chair, first of all, I'd like to just recognize the unfailing commitment and time spent by the member on transportation safety, rail safety, tug safety, and I do recall the very exacting question with respect to towing capacity of tugs. The member raises a fair point in terms of in the context of the marine safety system. The level of regulatory, the level of regulations and the level of regulatory oversight is less for smaller vessels below 15 tons. The entire Canada Shipping Act and the International Marine Safety System has a line, so where there's much more oversight on larger vessels. And the member has raised issues in terms of certification of these, because they do operate commercial vessels, and the west coast of BC has a large number of tugs that are just under 15 tons. So the one thing that we have done in response to this and other incidents is that we've done a lot of outreach to the industry. We've pulled together a comprehensive package to explain what they're required to do, and we've taken our oversight resources and we've targeted more of it on that sector of the industry, so they have a sense that they're actually being inspected, and we're seeing some progress therein. In terms of the exact question you've asked, I'm unsure, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Nick Robinson from Safety and Security. I don't know, Nick, do you know exactly the answer to the member's question?
With regards to certification standards, so there are certification standards related to those under 15 gross tons. We have hull certification requirements for those sorts of tugs, and we could provide those regulations with them, as well as the guidelines and the document, a number TP document that provides guidelines around the construction, certification, and inspection of those tugs under the 15 gross ton limit.
Okay.
And if I could just jump in,
Yes.
I think you raise a good point. There is a perception in the industry there are no regulatory requirements, and so what Nick is describing is the work that we've done recently to make it clear to the industry that there are regulatory standards that they're expected to maintain. And the level of inspection is not as comprehensive as on the larger vessels, but we have shifted some resources into that sector because of some of the safety risks that we've seen, which the member has done a great job bringing light to.
It just seems to me, Mr. Keenan, and you mentioned that there are a great number of these vessels just under 15 tons operating on the BC coast. It seems to me that the government has set a threshold for commercial certification and inspection, which costs the industry money, let's be fair. And as a result, there are a lot of vessels that fall just under that certification threshold. And we have a lot of incidents on the BC coast, as reported by the media and by the union that represents tugboat workers. There are a lot of safety incidents. I also hear stories about companies modifying the vessels so that they're able to get under that 15-ton threshold. It seems to me like we should err on the side of caution, on the side of worker safety, and we should simply require these vessels to be held to the same commercial inspection and certification standard that a whale watching vessel that holds 12 tourists is held to. Does that not seem to be like a fair, when we're talking about worker safety, when we're talking about situations where men have died on our coast, It just seems like a simple fix. Change the threshold. Why hasn't Transport Canada done that?
There are the fact that there is a safety issue with small tugs, we agree, and we've been taking a series of steps and actions to address that through outreach, oversight, enforcement. The wiping away the distinction between larger and smaller vessels is not, so we've certainly raised the bar for the tugs under 15 tons, and we're always looking at what else we can do with that respect. But going in and rewriting the Canada Shipping Act to eliminate the distinction between smaller vessels and larger vessels would be inconsistent with the international marine safety system. So we're continuing to look at that. I think there is, I would agree with the member that we see a higher incident rate, risk rate for smaller vessels, whether it's a passenger vessel, these passenger vessels under 12 passengers do not have the same requirements as the larger ferries and the larger cruise ships, and we see it on the commercial side. So,
thank you very much.
On both sides, we're actually trying to strengthen that because that is where the risk is, and so the question.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. And I know you had another question, Mr. Bachrach, and it looks like we will be able to get back to you to follow up. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Keenan, I'm hoping you can tell me what percentage of Transport Canada employees have returned to work in the office.
I can tell you that first of all, when the return to work in the office is not a great way of, we are measuring this. I think we are, I'll tell you a number in a second when Ryan reminds me, but going back to the work, we've been very careful because many Transport Canada employees never work in an office. We have thousands of people that their job is
right. I guess without getting into that, I just wanted to know how close we are to a pre-pandemic normal, if we can say it that way.
So we've been tracking that and taking into account what I
Right.
just said. We're running currently about 40% of the pattern we saw before the pandemic in terms of people coming into the office.
In testimony on labor shortages, et cetera, some of the studies we've done about the increase in delays in getting. Obviously, there was a pilot medical issue, which I understand there's been some resolution there, restricted access passes, all of the things that Transport Canada has to provide approvals for security reasons, that was being delayed. How close are you to getting back to your pre-pandemic service standard on authorizations, if I can put it that way?
So 3 parts to that. The first is that I've heard the same suggestion that because we've had folks sort of working remotely at home, we're less productive, and I can tell you without question the opposite is true. And in the last 2 years, Transport Canada, I've been the deputy for 7 years. The last 2 years, we did much more than we've ever done before. And we had, for most of that period, we had most of our employees working from home. If you look at any measure in terms of the regulatory work, the policy work, we got more with the same amount of people done. They're kind of tired right now because a lot of them have been working a lot of overtime, but we've been more productive as an organization. With respect to we're still encouraging, as part of our hybrid policy, we're still encouraging people to come into the work site to spend time together. It's not for productivity. It's for other reasons. With respect to the service standard, we did see the, for example, on things like ATIP, we maintained all our ATIP services right through we didn't skip a beat on stuff like that. With respect to transportation security clearances, we maintained a service standard. We got a little behind in the spring when we had an avalanche of new applications because as one of the challenges in the air sector was the 280% increase in traffic. the airports and the airlines hired a ton of people and sent us a tidal wave of applications. We brought that back down to pretty close to pre-pandemic. We had a similar problem with aviation medicals, but for the 60% on the spot, 70%. For 70% of the applications, we dramatically reduced the time required because we went to instant approvals. And we were able to do that because we had a digital system, which we put in place because we actually had everybody working at home. So we've been able to be more productive, and we've been able to get back. Where we have a problem, I have to concede, and we're still working on, is complex medical cases. There's a backlog there that is not where we want it to be, and we're continuing to work on that.
Final question that has come up repeatedly in media reports as well as stakeholder meetings is the question of the inability to load grain in Vancouver in the rain, which is, as a West Coaster, I can tell you that's a lot of days. And obviously, I think industry recognizes that there are legitimate safety concerns, but that the proposals are so onerous, setting up a railing system that takes 4 or 5 hours, it just makes it uneconomical. But it's also noted that we're the only jurisdiction that has this issue on the West Coast. So what can you tell us about the department's efforts to work with industry and labor to come up with a solution that will address this problem?
Well, thank you for the question, and it's a really important issue. And you can sort of more or less count the days where it doesn't rain in Vancouver in the winter as opposed to the days it rains. And we are currently working in the context of the supply chain challenges with the industry on any place where we see there's an opportunity to make progress. And there has been a combination of a safety arbitration ruling that goes back to 2017 or 2018, I think, and some regulations that came in with that have restricted, as the member has said, when the rules around loading in the grain that is having an impact on a number of days in Vancouver. We've just done some work reaching out. We've just talking to the grain industry, talking to union leadership, the terminal employer, the terminal operators in Vancouver, and we're trying to facilitate a discussion to try and find a solution to that. We're optimistic that with creative thinking and with the importance of feeding a hungry world, that we think that we're hopeful that there may be an opportunity to find a solution where there are more of those rainy days. There is a safe way to load the grain ships. That discussion is just
Sorry, Mr. Keenan.
underway.
Unfortunately, there's no time left for your response. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur
Mr. El Khoury, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to our witnesses for being in attendance here today to put forward your points of view and to respond to our committee members' questions. My first question, the major infrastructure projects are very difficult to keep to budget. What precautions is Transport Canada taking in that regard? I'm sorry. What precautions are you referring to? What precautions should Transport Canada take in relation to these major infrastructure projects? Major infrastructure projects like these are notorious in terms of keeping to budget.
Very difficult.
I understand.
Budget. What precaution Air Canada is taking in order to face the problem?
I'm sorry. It's my fault. I misunderstood your question. You're entirely right. It is very difficult to keep these projects to budget.
Now, Transport Canada is focused on one very large project, which is the high-frequency rail project. And as my colleague, Mr. Robitaille, indicated, we're working very systemically with the experts in the industry who we need as partners in terms of building relationships and partnerships. And we're building an internal capacity through the corporation via high-frequency rail to bring the best project management expertise into the employ of the Government of Canada to manage the project going forward and bringing as much transparency as we can. When a problem is encountered, make sure it is in the open, and the partners on the project are working to find a solution. The key strategy is to avoid allowing any of the problems to be buried and hidden, where they grow and grow and grow and then explode into like terrible cost overruns or terrible delays.
Pourquoi a-t-on décidé?
Why invest in improving rail services in northern Manitoba? Why have there been delays? I could just defer to my colleague Stephanie, who manages that project. Transport Canada, in collaboration with Prairies Can and Indigenous Services, undertook a number of studies, and what we realised in these studies is that without funding from the Government of Canada, it would not be possible to ensure rail access in Churchill.
Funding was announced. That funding has recently been announced as well by Prairies Can in collaboration with the province of Manitoba to undertake an investment to support capital repairs and to support critical infrastructure. And I think this will help maintain the rail service to northern Manitoba and for the 14 communities that really rely upon this service for transportation connectivity, for food security, and really to keep the cost down related to travel and the cost down related to the transportation of essential goods and services.
Y avait-il?
Now, was it urgent to act as you have?
C'était plutôt...
Well, the studies indicated that without the Government of Canada's intervention, there might be a stoppage in service, and we wanted to avoid any stoppage of service because we acknowledge the importance of that railroad for the community, and that is why the Government of Canada announced in collaboration with the Government of Manitoba an investment of funds to maintain that service. In the meantime, Transport Canada is considering its options and determining which ones are more long-term viable in terms of the service. Are you satisfied with all the steps taken by Transport Canada in terms of air, land and sea transportation? And what about the recommendations that have been made? What can be improved upon? And would you have other recommendations to make in order to improve the system? Well, it's our sense that it is always possible to improve the system. And that's our daily work, in fact, to achieve that goal. As far as recommendations are concerned, we remain open to suggestions, recommendations, including those from this committee, in order to move forward on these priorities.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Alcourt. Mr. Keenan. Prochainement, nous avons...
Mr. Basile-Duval, 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Now, as you could answer my question, if you would, that I asked earlier, how can an everyday person ensure that they can file complaints about noise issues and get a bit of peace in their lives in relation to helicopter and airplane noise? How can they have justice get justice on this issue? Well, that's a very good question. And it's a question that's often raised in relation to almost all airports. First, we encourage, and in fact we require airports to have a complaints system in place in order to respond to residents' complaints, especially those in the local neighbourhoods. And we do have certain policies and requirements in place in relation to those airports, certain thresholds they need to meet when it comes to responding to such complaints. I'll call on Nick to elaborate.
There are a couple of ways we like to encourage individuals to engage in those sorts of concerns with regards to particularly smaller airports. So the first one is that we ensure that the airports in small communities are having and do encourage to have strong relationships with the communities around them. An airport has to exist with the support of the communities around them. So we in our regulations, when they're looking at sort of an expansion of services, an expansion of a major expansion of the infrastructure within their airport, there are opportunities and there are requirements for those airports to engage in their communities, to see the concerns, to provide the studies that they have around how the noise may increase in the community, what other impacts in and around the wildlife of the community might be present, and so that the communities can input and feed into the decisions and how these projects may be undertaken. With regards to a particular complaint, though, there's absolutely a mechanism where individuals can contact Transport Canada. We receive them quite frequently, like the Deputy Minister mentioned, and where we see that there are contraventions of rules, contravention of flight hours, if there is dangerous flight altitudes that are being undertaken, we will not hesitate to review that and make sure that the airport and the air operators within the airport are in compliance and that they're following the rules that we've laid out.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barcel-Duval. Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So many questions and so little time. I'm tempted to continue my questions about tugboat safety, but I wanted to clarify what I was suggesting in my last round of questions wasn't to require certification of all small commercial vessels, just those that are involved in commercial towing, which I believe you'll agree is a uniquely risky activity, similar to the unique risks involved in carrying more than 12 passengers. But I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the other concerns that I've heard from people in the tugboat industry, which is the lack of regulations around the size of load that a tugboat of a certain size can pull. Jason Woods, the president of ILWU Local 400, was quoted as saying, "Right now you have a culture of lax standards. You can tow a barge full of logging equipment on a bungee cord if you want to." My question, is there any regulatory limit on the size of load that can be towed commercially by a barge under 15 tons? By a tugboat under 15 tons. You're not going to tow anything with a barge. Yeah.
I wasn't going to try for that out. It's a very
be a good way to use up the 2.5 minutes.
It's a very good question. I believe there is there are limits in terms of the load. I do not know the details. Nick, I don't know if you know the details.
So part of the carriage.
You have to hit the button.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Part of the carriage of what they can load is embedded into their safety management system with particular companies. So a particular company will have a safety management system in place, and they have to comply with that safety management system.
Right. But that's
there
the company's own rules.
But there are
does the government, if you have a tug under 15 tons, does the government have any rules around the size of load you can tow with that?
We'd have to I'll have to verify that and come
Mr.
back.
Keenan?
Can I commit that we will get back to you on that? I believe there is a framework in terms of towing limits for tugs that applies. I would concede and recognize that this is an area where we're continuing to do work. That's a very good question. We'll come back with an answer on that, and we'll continue to be open to look at ways of strengthening the safety performance in key areas where we see room for improvement, and this is one of them. So I will come back on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. And finally, for today, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. So I wanted to pick up on a question that my colleague, Mr. Stroll, had from the minister at the end, and of course, the time ran out, but it was about the increase, of course, in electrification of vehicles, and obviously we're seeing that uptick. In fact, in my home province of Ontario, there was an announcement today by the provincial government with regard to that. But the comment was made about whether, or the question was asked about whether the grid could sustain that. And, you know, while I realize that that's a matter of provincial jurisdiction, and the minister referred to some federal contribution towards helping the provinces do that. I mean, certainly, you know, as Transport Canada and as the federal government is looking to increase the use of and the production and use of electric vehicles across Canada, I mean, there's an interest in whether there's going to be a sufficient capacity on the grid to sustain that. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts would be on that.
Very good question. The minister indicated there's sort of two parts to it. There's actually having the gas up or the recharge facilities, which he answered. There's a lot of work in terms of making sure those are in place. So that part of the en route question is covered. There is, as part of the shift towards electric vehicles and their charging requirements, either at home, at work, or on the road, is part of a changing dynamic around the electricity grid, the growing use of renewables and generation as well. So the grid, there's a lot of change dynamics on the grid. Transport Canada works very closely with Natural Resources Canada on these issues of grid readiness for the evolution of not just zero-emission vehicles on the road, but you know, on marine ports, et cetera. And there's a lot of work that's happening between Natural Resources Canada and their provincial energy counterparts on grid readiness for really the broader shift to net zero 2050. Cars are part of it, but there's also the renewables. So it's a big issue, a lot of work being done, and it needs to land well.
Is enough being done? Because I mean, $250 million, frankly, is a drop in the bucket, right? So, and I hear you with regard to, you know, not just the cars, but the marine sector and other sectors too. So, I mean, you know, is enough being done, and what's being done to accelerate that?
There is a lot of work being done, and there are a lot of projects. You know, Atlantic Loop out east, Northwest Grid. There's a lot of projects to evolve the grid and the connections. Most of these are under provincial jurisdiction, but there's a lot of federal provincial discussion, and there's investment partnerships to ensure we're on a pathway of readiness, and it's an area that's going to require constant work in the years to come. Are we on a path to solve it? I think my sense in talking to my colleagues at Natural Resources Canada and in the provinces, the discussions are there and the work is there, but it has to continue.
Switching to the high-frequency rail, and just, you know, a question, and so just help me understand the thinking behind a subsidiary of Via Rail rather than, did we not have the expertise within Via to do this, or why sort of the structure that was put forward, and whether that's, you know, efficient and gives the high-frequency rail opportunities to succeed?
The thinking, I would say first and foremost, there's Via's a first-class operator of a rail system, and it has expertise that is essential to the success of the project. But there is a lot of expertise, a lot of skill, a lot of capacity that we need to build and develop in order to properly manage this complex project. It's not currently in Via, it's not currently in the Government of Canada, and so we're building a dedicated corporation as a project office to assemble that skill and have that entity focused on one thing, the development and delivery of that project. And the project will be done in partnership with Via, but we think we need a very purposeful development of of that project capacity. And part of what drives us is that we have been looking systemically at the hard lessons of other projects, and you can see them now in the Ottawa LRT and the report that's come out. So we're studying that with great interest and ensuring that we're establishing a pathway that avoids the pretty terrible potholes that some others have found themselves in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse, and thank you, Mr. Keenan. On behalf of all committee members, I want to thank our witnesses from the department for joining us today. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.